Welcome to Microsoft Access 2016, a tutorial for beginners brought to you by AccessLearningZone.com. My name is Richard Rost, your instructor and two-time Microsoft MVP. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a Microsoft Access database. We will learn how to build tables, queries, forms, and a mailing label report all in about half an hour. So if you're interested in learning Microsoft Access, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Now here we see I started Microsoft Access, and across the top you can see there's some different templates you can pick from, like asset tracking and contacts and stuff, but I want to build my own database from scratch, so we're going to use blank database. Down below here you'll see some previous databases that I've used in the past, and you can click on these if you want to open those, but for now, let's go ahead and click on blank database. Just click on it once, that'll select it, double click on it, and that'll open up a blank database for you. Next, you're asked for a file name. It defaults to database 1. You can click in here and change it. I can call it like Rick's Database or whatever you want to name it. It's going to save it in the Users Richard Documents folder. You can change that as well by clicking on this Browse button. But for now, I'm just going to click on Create. Now, Access creates your database file, and this is going to be a single file that contains all of your objects, all of your tables, your queries, your reports. They're all going to be inside this one file, which is your database file, an ACCDB file for those of you who care. Now the first thing Access does for you is it wants you to create a table. You can see right here it's called Table 1. This is your list of objects over here. All your tables and other things will show up in this list. And I'll talk about what all these different objects are in just a minute. But Table 1 is the first table in your database. Now what is a table? A table basically contains all of the data in your database. Whether you're storing information on customers or orders or business cards or your baseball card collection, all of the data, all the information in your database goes into something called a table. You'll have one or more tables in your database, and you can actually get them to work together. In today's class, as a brief introduction, we're just going to talk about having one table to store information. Now, tables are broken down into fields and records, which if you're used to working with spreadsheets at all, like Microsoft Excel, you're used to rows and columns. Well, in a database, they're just named something differently. In a database, you have fields that store different types of information. For example, first name, last name, address, zip code. Those are all different fields. And the rows will be the records for the different customers. For example, customer 1, customer 2, and so on. So rows and columns are records and fields in Access. Now Access starts off each table with an ID field. And an ID is basically a unique identifier for each record. For example, with customers, you'd have a customer ID. With orders, you'd have an order ID. In Access, this is something called an auto number. It's going to start off at 1 and automatically count up as you add records, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And no, you can't change them easily. But you don't have to worry about what these IDs are. That's something Access uses internally. Now we're going to add some additional fields to our table so we can store more information. So I'm going to click right here where it says click to add, and this big list pops up. Short text is good for text fields, things that have numbers and letters. For example, first name, last name, address, those would all be text fields. Numbers for storing numeric values, things that you'll work with every day. There's also large numbers, which go into really, really high values that you probably won't work with unless you're doing scientific information. Currency for dollar amounts. Dates and times, which can store dates and times, both or them together in one field. So you can say like January 5th at 6 p.m. Yes or no. Lookups and relationships we'll talk about in a later class. Rich text is if you want to have formatting, like colors and bold and italics inside one of your fields. Long text is basically like a memo field. You can have lots and lots of information, up to 1 gigabyte of information you can type in there. Attachments, if you want to link a file, like a resume or something, into your table. Hyperlinks, if you want to link to a web page or an email address. And then there's calculated fields, lots of different stuff you can do in here. These are more advanced features, but for today we're going to stick with the basics. So let's pick short text, which is the text field you're going to use most of the time. And right here where it says field 1, we're going to give this field a name. I'm going to type in first name. Now, I don't like to use spaces in my field names. It's just a personal preference. You can if you want to. But trust me, if you get into advanced development and you start programming with VBA, you're going to not want spaces in your field names. So just trust me. All right? I'm going to press enter, and that'll move me over to the next field. Again, let's add short text. And here we'll put in last name. Can you put first name and last name together? You can, but I recommend that you don't. It's better to split this stuff up into separate fields if possible. It makes it much easier. You might want to make a report later that says, Dear Henry, or whatever. And if you've got first name and last name together in the same field, it makes that much more difficult. So I recommend breaking stuff up. Let's add another short text. Let's go with company name. And of course, if you're putting in individuals that don't work for companies, you can leave that blank. You can always leave fields blank. Let's try a number field. How about employees? Put the number of employees there. And yes, you could put num employees or whatever works for you. Let's put in a currency value of credit limit. How much are they allowed to spend at my company? Let's go with a date time. How about customer since? How long have they been a customer? And you can resize these fields, by the way. If you can't see the entire thing there, you can resize these left and right by clicking on this little divider between them. See that? Right, like that. Let's do one more. How about let's drop this down. Let's go with a yes or no value. Now watch what happens. If I accidentally click down here or click off that field, it's stuck at field 1, and you can't just click back on here to rename it. So what you can do is you can right-click and come down to rename field. If you don't want a field, you can delete a field. But I'm going to go with rename field, and now I can type in the value that I want. How about is active? Is this an active customer or not? And don't put a question mark in there. Never put question marks. Don't put any kind of punctuation in here. All right, is active just tells us are they on our mailing lists. You know, maybe if the customer is deceased, you no longer want to send them mailings and things of that nature. Now, you can just type in data into blank fields, but I don't recommend it. It's best, unlike Excel, it's best to actually give these fields good names, because we'll work with them later. And one more field. Let's put in here another short text. Let's put in state. And I'm going to use this for some queries later on. You can put the full address in there if you want to. Address, city, state, zip code, country. I cover that in my full classes. But for today, we're just going to stick with state. Now that we have the table defined, we have the fields all defined in here, let's go ahead and put in some actual data. So I'm going to click back over here on first name. I'm going to put myself in, Richard. Notice as soon as I start typing, the record is being entered into the table, and you can see I'm ID number 1. All right, I'll hit Tab to move to the next field, just like Excel. Rost, right, company name, Amicron. Employees will say 2. My credit limit, I'll give myself a good credit limit, 10,000. Customer since, how about 1194? Is active? Yes, you can check with the space bar. You can tap that on or off. I know I'm the kind of person where when I'm working on the keyboard typing in data, I don't have to stop and grab my mouse. So yes, you can click on this with the mouse if you want to, or you can just use the keyboard. Tab, State of New York. And yes, you can make drop-down boxes so you can pick from a list of states, and that's a little more advanced. I'll cover those in the advanced classes. And then I'll just tab and tab again, and now I'm down on record number 2, the next record. So let's put a couple more customers in here. Let's go with Joe Smith. We'll leave the company name blank. He's got no employees, a $2,000 credit limit, customer since 1/1/2010, and he's active from Pennsylvania. And how about Sue Jones from XYZ Corp? Employees, let's say 15, $15,000 credit limit, customer since 1/1/2018, not active anymore, and she's from Texas. All right, and that's basic data entry. Pretty simple. Now, the data is automatically saved in your table as soon as you make a move from one record to another. So, for example, if I'm up here editing Sue Jones, let's say I change this to Susan. Notice the little pencil pop up over here? That means this record is dirty. That means this data has not been saved to the table yet. Okay? So as soon as you move to another record or to a new record like this, that information gets saved in the table. You don't have to manually remember to save it like you do with Excel. Now, if you make design changes to the table, if you add new fields or delete fields, then that information you have to manually save. So we're going to come up here and click on the little Save button, or you can hit Control S on your keyboard, and that will ask you to save this table. Now, let's give the table a name. This will be my customer list. So I'm going to put in here Customer T. Again, this is a personal preference. It's a convention that I use. I like to end all of my tables in the letter T. My queries will be ended in Q, my forms in F, and my reports in R. And again, if you go a little bit further into Access Development and programming and such, it's sometimes helpful to know whether you're dealing with a table or a query, what kind of object you have. And it just helps if it's customer T, you know it's a table and you can treat it accordingly. Otherwise, you got to look it up and figure it out. And sometimes you can have a customer table and a customer query as well. And so the T and the Q help to differentiate. So I'm going to hit OK, and that'll save it as my customer T over here in my object list. Now that we have this table saved, let's go ahead and close it. I'm going to close this table by clicking on this little X right here in the tab, and that closes it down. If you want to open it back up, just double-click right here on the customer T in the pane. Okay. If you don't see this object pane, click on this little button right there. That shrinks it up. That's just to save you some space. If you want some more room here on the table to work with, you can click on that little button there to open and close it. So let's close down the customer T. Let's create another table real quick. I'm going to show you a different method to create a table. Click on Create, and then click on Table Design. That opens up this thing. It looks slightly different. And one thing I should mention, by the way, I have my menus collapsed. If you want these menus to stay open all the time, just double-click on one of these entries, like double-click on Create, and now this menu stays open all the time. This is called the ribbon. I think it wastes a lot of space, so I'm not going to leave it open. I'm going to double-click again. That collapses it down. Some people like that open all the time. I don't. But now we're inside the Table Designer, and this is where you can come. This is how I like to build my tables. This is where we just come in here and specify the field names first. Then we go into data entry mode, and we can type in the data. So let's say we also want to store something completely different in here. Let's say we want to store a list of our products. All right. So the first field that you want to put in any table is the ID field for that table. So click right here. I'm going to put in product ID and then tab over, and that's going to be an auto number. Now you can drop this box down and pick auto number, or you can just type A and it'll pop up. Tab. Description is optional. You can put a description in here if you want to. This is mostly for the developer, so you know what it is, but it'll also show up in some other places, like in the footer on forums. I never use it pretty much. All right, the product name. I try not to use the word name as a field by itself because name is a reserved word in Access. When you get into programming, that can cause problems. So, like with customers, we have first name and last name. Well, here I like product name. All right, short text. Short text is going to be what you use most of the time. How about the unit cost? That'll be a currency value. And then maybe quantity in stock. That'll be a number. And there's different number types, too, if you look down here. There's long integers and bytes and integers and doubles and decimals. And I cover all of these in my full class. The vast majority of the number type you're going to use is long integer. Those are counting numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and their negatives, for example. If you need fractional values, you can use double or decimal. But I usually use long integer for most things. And then if you want notes, all right, they used to be called memo fields. Now they're called long text. All right, if you're using an older version of Access, before 2007, I think it was called a memo field. Okay, and that's good. We're going to hit Save, Control S, and we would save this as my product T. Okay, now when you save it, it says there's no primary key defined. What's a primary key? Well, a primary key is that one field in each table that Access will use to uniquely identify each record. And we already have that. It's called the product ID. Right? No two products will have the same ID, and it is an auto number. It's just we have to tell Access that's what we want to use as the primary key. Say yes, and it will find it for you. See the little key over here? All right, Access automatically found that as our product ID. Now I'm going to save this again, Control S. All right. Now you can switch right over to view this for data entry mode. It's actually called Data Sheet View. There's a couple ways to get there. You can click on this Design tab here, and then go over here to Data Sheet View, or I'm going to hit Escape. Or you can right-click on the tab header and go to Data Sheet View. That puts you in this, which we remember from before when we made our customer table, right? And you can just come in here and put some data in. Like we can put in here keyboard, and it costs $10, and I have 6 in stock, right? And how about hard drive, comma, I don't know, what do they go on? 2 terabytes nowadays, right? $200. It's been a while since I sold computers. Quantity in stock, we have 4, and so on. Okay. Close that, and now we have 2 tables. Do you want to say the layout changes? Layout changes are when you make a change to like the width of a column. All right, that's a layout change. I'll just say yes. Now we have 2 tables in my database here. We have a customer table and we have a product table, and you can open them both up side by side if you want to. Customers and products. Now one thing to note is these tables have nothing to do with each other. My customers and my products are 2 totally separate groups of information. Customers and products are never by themselves related together. When we get into my expert level classes, we're going to talk about table relationships, how you can get information to work together. For example, you might want to know which customers purchased which products. If you want to send out a marketing brochure to people who purchased, let's say, hard drives, then you'd want that information handy. We would need a third table to relate them together in this case. For example, an order table. The order table will tell you which customers ordered which products. Every time you put an order in the system, you put a record in the order table. Then we can set up relationships between those tables. That's more advanced. This is a beginner class. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to have a link to my expert classes in the description below this video. But getting back to the beginner stuff, getting back to table design here, one other thing I'd like to note is that I personally don't like this tabbed interface. I like to use windows inside of Access. So I'm going to switch my database over to window mode, overlapping window mode. Here's how you do it. Go up to File, and then Options, go to Current Database, and then pick right here under Document Window Options. The default is Tab Documents. I'm going to pick Overlapping Windows. Hit OK. You have to close and reopen the current database. Hit OK. So we're going to have to close this down, restart Access, and right down here on your recent databases, you'll see Rick's database. That's the one we're working with. Or you can click on Open and browse through. And here we go. Now, it says Security Warning. Some active content has been disabled. That is something that you will see when you're opening databases, especially if you get databases from other people. Basically, it is possible for a malicious programmer to put stuff in an Access database in Visual Basic that could do things like delete files on your system. So before accepting a database file or a spreadsheet or a Word document from someone else, all right, make sure it's safe. We built this database ourselves, so we know it's okay. We really don't have anything in this database, but Access is just being careful. So hit Enable Content, and that will mark this database as safe. But now you can see when I open these up, they open up inside of Windows inside of Access. That's the way I prefer it. I like to have my different windows. I can resize them and move them around, and you'll see how this comes in handy when we work with forms. I don't like the tabs across top. Some people do. It's a matter of preference. Okay, let's open up the customer table. Now, sometimes you may not want to see all the information that's there. If you get thousands and thousands of customer records, you might want to filter this so that you can only see, for example, customers from New York. So, how do we do that? Well, come over here where the state field is, drop this little box down, and right down here you can see a thing that says Text Filters. All right? You can turn off Select All and turn on New York, for example. When I hit OK, you'll see that the list has been filtered, so I only see people from New York. Down here it says Filtered. See that? You can turn the filter off by just clicking on that button, and there you see everybody again. Let's cheat. Let's change this Texas record here to New York, just so we can see it work with more than one record. All right, drop this down, and then we'll pick New York. And there you go. And again, I'll turn the filter off. Let's try another one. Let's see, you only want to see customers who have a $10,000 credit limit or more. Okay, it's a little more advanced. Drop this down. You can pick individual records if you want to, or you can click on this thing called Number Filters. All right, Number Filters, and then I'll pick Greater Than. You can see there's less than, equals, does not equal. Pick Greater Than. All right, credit limit is greater than or equal to 10,000. And there you go. Now we have a filter on. All right, I'll remove the filter, and there's everybody back again. Can you put both of those filters out at the same time? Sure. Come over here, pick New York, hit OK. Come over here, drop this down, Number Filters, greater than 10,000, and then hit OK. And there we go. It just so happens that our two people from New York happen to have the bigger credit limits. But that might not always be the case. And if you're working with thousands of records, you can see where this is a lot of work. And you might have someone using your database like a secretary who's not an Access expert. So it'd be nice if you had a simple, quick way to just see this list of records, the people from New York with large credit limits, without having to go through all these steps of opening the table, putting on the state filter, putting on the credit limit filter. So you want to make this quick and simple. That's where queries come in. Okay? The table stores all of the data. And yeah, you can look at it different ways if you know what you're doing. A query is a quick, simple thing that you build that shows you just a specific set of information based on the criteria that you selected. So let's see how we can build a query to show us this information. All right, I'm going to turn the filter off. I almost never use filters in my tables. If I want something like this, unless it's like a one-time thing, most of the time I'll just build a query for it because it's easy. All right, save design changes, sure. So how do we make a query? Well, it's going to be under the Create menu, and then Query Design. You get this window up here that says Show Table. Now, the Show Table is what other tables or queries, you can actually make queries that are based on other queries. But we're going to do tables and then customer T. You can put multiple tables that are related to each other inside a query too. That's more advanced. We'll talk about that in the expert classes. But I'm just going to put customer T in here and then click on Add, and you'll see it pops up in the background. All right, now hit Close. Okay, you can rearrange things if you want to make things easier to see. Like I can grab this bottom of this box and bring it down so I can see all the fields in there. This is your table and the list of fields in the table. Down here are where we're going to put the fields that we want to see in our query. So for example, you may or may not want to see the customer ID. So you can click on it and drag it and drop it right here in the first column if you want to see it. If you don't want to see it, then don't do that. If you've already put it in there and want to get rid of it, just click on this little bar across the top and then hit delete on your keyboard. That'll get rid of a field that's in your query already. I don't particularly care to see the ID in this query. So I'm going to bring in first name. You can double click on them too. Watch this. Double click and there it goes. First name, last name. You can also pick from this drop-down box here. There's a million ways to do things in Access. Everything in Access has at least 3 or 4 different ways. It's a matter of finding whichever way you prefer. All right, first name, last name. I want credit limit and state. That's all. All right, now that we've got our query kind of set up, let's run it and see what the results are going to be. Now, there's a couple different ways to run the query. If you click on Design under Query Tools, there's a Run button right here. You can click on that. Okay, that's one way. I'll show you a couple ways in a minute. And you can see there's the results of my query. It's called Query 1 right now. We'll save it with a name in just a minute. All right, first name, last name, credit limit, state. I haven't put any criteria on yet, so it's just showing me all the records. Okay, let's go back to Design View. Right-click, Design View, or you can use the menu up top if you want to. Right, there's Design View, SQL View, and Datasheet View. All right, Design View is where you design it like this. You'll also find these buttons right down here in the bottom right corner. All right, that's a nice little addition. Or again, if you have the menu open, there's that. I don't like usually leaving the menus open. The only time I'll usually leave the menu open is when I'm designing forms, because it's easy to have all the controls right there. But I'm going to turn that off for now. So how do I get this list to show me just customers from New York? Well, right here, where it says criteria, type in New York, and then press Tab. Now notice that Access put quotes around the New York. That's okay. Anything that's text has to have quotes around it. But if you forget, Access usually puts them there for you. All right, let's run the query now. Bottom right corner, click on this guy here, Datasheet View, and there it is. Now it's filtered. Okay, not technically a filter, it's query, but yeah. The results are filtered so you can see just the records from New York. Okay, back to Design View. If you want to see, notice over here where it says criteria, all right, there's OR rows too. You can put this or this. If you put them together in the same row, it's an AND condition. So if you want to see customers who are from New York who also have a credit limit of at least $10,000, over here you can put greater than or equal to 10,000, like that. That's an AND condition, all right, going AND across the row. And now if I run the query, you can see it's the same records. Let's change this. Now, the query view here is live. This is live data. All right, you're only seeing certain fields, but any changes that you make at this point will get saved in your table. So if I put in here 5,000, all right, that information just got saved in the table. Now it's still visible in the query because we haven't saved the, we haven't rerun the query. We have to actually close the query and rerun it. So I'm going to go back to Design View and then run it again. And now you can see I'm only seeing customers who are both from New York and have a credit limit of at least $10,000. Let's go back to Design View. If you want to see customers who have a $10,000 credit limit or are from New York, so they match both of those criteria, I'm going to just cut that out, Control X, and paste it down here. I'm going to move it down a row. That's what this OR is for. It's this all the way across the row or this all the way across the row. And if I run it now, I can see the customers that are either from New York or have a $10,000 credit limit. So this guy qualifies because he's from New York, and this guy qualifies because of both. And that's how the criteria work in a query. Now, the nice thing about queries is once they're built, you don't have to keep rebuilding them or learn how to do filters or teach people how to do anything other than just simply running the query. So let's save this query. I'm going to Control S and save. We'll save this query as customers from New York, 10,000. So that's 10,000 credit limit. Q. I like to put a Q on the end of all my queries. Okay? And you can name that whatever you want. That's just something that I picked. Let's go ahead and close this query down now. Now, in order to run it, you just double-click on it, and there's your results. And that's all that your end user has to do, or you, if you're the end user. If you want to design it, you can right-click on it and go to Design View and make changes. You can copy and paste this too, if you want to make slightly different ones. You can even do things called parameters, where if you don't know the state or if you don't know the credit limit ahead of time, you can run the query and then it'll ask you, what state do you want? You type in New York. That's something I cover in a future class though. But there's all kinds of things you can do with queries. Now, one of the things with building an Access database is that you don't want your end users to have to work with your tables directly. Plus, this format here isn't very user-friendly. So that's where forms come in. Forms allow us to design a nice, pretty screen, a nice, pretty user interface for our end users. Or, if you're the only one using your database, you can lay out the form fields, right? First name, last name, the fields. You can lay everything out exactly the way you want to see it to make it more user-friendly. Now, I could very easily spend hours going over proper form design and aesthetics, and in my normal classes, my full-length classes, I spend a lot of time on form design. But for today, I'm going to give you the crash course. So let's close down this table. Now, for form design, I like to leave the ribbon open. All right, so just double-click on any one of these guys up here. We're going to be working with the Create tab. This leaves this open, and you'll see in a minute how it's easier to access all the controls and stuff. So step one, click on the table that has the data in it. This is the table that we're going to be basing our form off of. All the customer information is stored in the customer table. Step two, go to Create, and then click on Form. And Access builds for you this thing right here. This is a user form. Now, once again, I hate to keep mentioning this, but in my full Access tutorials, and you can watch them free on YouTube, I do cover building forms from scratch, but this is a quick way to build a simple form using Access's built-in Form Designer. If you want to learn form design from scratch, go watch my full-length Access beginner classes. And yes, again, level 1 is free. But here you can see all the fields, right? There's ID, first name, last name, company name. You can resize these if you don't want them to be that big, like you don't need first name to be double height. Same thing with last name, you can do that, right? Company name. You can resize them this way too if you don't want that column to be quite so wide. Right? Same thing with this column over here. Alright, state doesn't have to be that big. Okay, that's basic form design. We can save this, Control S, save this. I'm going to save this as customer F. I like to put F on the end of all my form names. Again, that's one of my personal conventions. And you can close this form, double click on it to open it back up again. You can move through the different records by clicking on these navigation buttons down here. This goes to the next record, the previous record. This goes to the first record and the last record. And if you want to add a blank new record, click on this button right there. That'll go to a blank new record. Press Tab, and you can see you can tab through the fields. So first name, Alice Smith, right? No company, no employees, $10 credit limit. If you don't have information like customer sense, if you don't know it, leave it blank. That's fine. Or state or is active, right? We'll mark her active and put state of Florida. Tab again, and that'll move you to the next new record. So you can keep using tab to move through the fields. Here's an example of something you can do with forms. This is from my full, more advanced classes. You can see you can turn forms into menus with different buttons on them. You can click on Open Customer List, see your list of customers. You can double click on one of these. It'll open up that particular customer form. There's different controls in here. You can add colors, other buttons, and so on. There's lots and lots that you can do with forms. You can design, toggle buttons and option groups and subforms. And I cover all this stuff in my regular classes. But I just want to show you what forms are used for. They're used for working with the data on the screen in a nice, pretty user interface, and you can make it so that someone who doesn't know Access can very easily move around through the different things like products or employees or contacts. If you want to make design changes again, you can simply right-click, go to Design View, and then you can move these fields around in here if you want. Let's say you want last name on top of first name. You can click on it and drag it up here and drop it. And then, see, sometimes these things move around a little bit, so you have to grab credit limit and put it back up here. All right, customer sense, and then move these things around. I cover a lot more about working with form design in my full classes, like I've said a couple times. But this gives you the basics. I'm going to close this and not save changes. That way I can open it back up again, and that's where it was. So now we've got a couple of tables. We've got a query, and we've got a form. One more thing to look at today, and that's a report. Now, forms are for working with the data on the screen. Reports are for printing stuff, either printing a physical hard copy or making a PDF file and sending it to someone else in email. If you want to present it in a printed format, you'd use a report, whereas forms are for working on the screen. I know sometimes people say forms and they really mean printed reports because they think you're filling out a form on paper. But in Access terminology, a form you work with on the screen and a report you print out. So let's make a simple report. Now, the coolest report that I think is the mailing label report. So we're going to go to Create. And then over on Reports over here, you can create basic reports. You can put charts in them, all kinds of things. There is a wizard you can run through that helps you with some of the standard customized reports. But I want to go to Labels. I love the Label Wizard. This guy's pretty cool. It lets you make mailing labels. Now, I personally use Avery labels, or labels that are compatible with the Avery style. The 5160 is the one that I use. That gives you 30 labels on a page. It's 3 across and 10 down. I'm going to pick that guy. You can pick from any format you want in this list. Hit Next. The label appearance, the font, right? I'm going to go with the defaults, Arial 8-point. You can change this if you want to. Hit Next. Now we build what's called the prototype label. That's basically taking these fields from over here and making a label out of them over on this side. So I don't care about ID for my labels, for my mailing labels. I want first name, so you can double-click on it here, or you can click on this little button right there. Press spacebar. That'll put a space between first name and last name. Right? Double-click on last name. There you go. Enter. Company name. Enter. Now here's where you'd put address and city, but we don't have those. We just put state in our database, so pick state. And you could do city, space, state, comma, space, zip if you want to. But that's all we've got. All right, hit the next button. You can sort them by one or more fields. Let's sort by last name and then by first name. So if two last names are the same, like Smith, it'll sort by first name. Click on Next. All right, I'm going to change the name of this to my mailing label R, or if you want to be more specific, you could do customer mailing label, because you could have mailing labels for vendors too if you have a vendor table. Customer mailing label R, and then we'll see the labels as they will look printed. Then hit Next. Let's see here what we got. Oh, Finish. I'm looking for Next. I'm like, Next isn't lit. Okay, this is the last one. That's why they should take that button off of there. Ready and Finish. And there are my mailing labels. All right, with all the information that you have. Notice if you don't have a field like the company name, it just shrinks it up and you don't see it. But if you zoom out, you can click to zoom out. See how my mouse pointer is a little magnifying glass? You can zoom in and out. That's what it will look when you print it. And to print it, you can just right-click and go to Print, or there's Print up here on the top. You can export it as a PDF. You can do all kinds of stuff. And so that's basically how you create a report. And you can do all kinds of things. You can make reports that are invoices. You can do customer lists. You can do all kinds of stuff with Access. If you want to make design changes, you can. You can right-click and go to Design View and come in here and make design changes. There's one label. But honestly, it's so easy to make mailing labels. It's easier just to recreate them from scratch running through the wizard if you want to edit this label. Unless you want to do something simple like move a field like down here like that. Okay? I'm going to put that back where it was. Or just close it and don't save it. There you go. So there are the 4 basic objects that you work with in an Access database. You got tables to store the data. All the data in this database is actually stored in the tables. There is no data in your queries, forms, or reports. Those are for display purposes only. Queries allow you to display the information in a table format, but however you want. You can filter it, you can sort it, you can limit the records. Forms for working on the screen, and then reports for printing stuff out or emailing stuff. Now, if you click on Create up top here, you will see there are some templates that you can use. There are tables, queries, forms, reports. There are macros and modules you can also build. These are more advanced. I cover them in my advanced and developer classes. You can actually add the full power of the Visual Basic programming language right inside of your Access databases. There's tons and tons you can do. Before I was into training, I was a Access developer by trade, and so I built some pretty complicated databases in my day. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. People who say that Microsoft Access isn't a powerful database don't understand it. It really is a good database. And if you are concerned about security or size limitations, you can use Access to develop your front end and put your data, your tables and such, in SQL Server or an online web server, and just use Access to connect to that. So there's all kinds of different things you can do. And yes, Access is, in my opinion, the best desktop database development tool.
If you would like to learn more about building databases in Microsoft Access, I have a free 3-hour-long video tutorial. It's right here on YouTube or on my website. It covers lots more about building databases in Microsoft Access, and it's absolutely free. I will put a link that you can click on in the description down below the video. If you like Level 1, Level 2 is just $1. That's another whole hour-long course. Also, feel free to check out my Tech Help video series where I answer questions about Microsoft Access. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and feel free to share it anywhere you think people might be interested in Microsoft Access. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, which is completely free, and click that bell icon to select all and be notified every time I post a new video. Click on that Show More link down below the video for additional resources and links. Once again, my name is Richard Rost, and thank you very much for learning with AccessLearningZone.com.